Welcome to the Mason Duchatschek Show. And before we jump in, this episode is brought to you by WorkforceAlchemy.com, the place where business owners and executives go to uncover and address profit leaks hidden in their everyday operations. Today's guest, Jason Bohrer, is the author of Resilient, the 7-pillar system for peak performance on demand, and the creator of a regulation-first performance system for high achievers. His work was born from a 12-month personal odyssey where he went searching for greater discipline, capacity, clarity, and peak performance, only to discover that the real foundation was not more effort, it was regulation. Years earlier, Jason had also experienced a brain bleed that forced him to confront recovery, identity, and the limits of pushing through. But the heart of Resilient is the realization that many successful people are not lacking ambition. They're operating from dysregulation and calling it drive. Today, Jason works with founders, executives, and driven professionals who look successful on the outside, but are quietly running themselves into the ground. Welcome to the show, Jason. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
So what was this 12-month odyssey that led to Resilient?
Yeah, I was chasing the next version of myself. More output, more discipline, more capacity, more clarity. I had done the work. I'd read the books. I built the systems. I'd tried all the frameworks, and I wanted to operate at a higher level. So I went deep. I tracked everything. I tested my routines, my sleep, my inputs, my mindset, my environment. I was methodical and I was very serious about this, and I was getting results, but they were fragile. I'd built a great stack, and then something would disrupt it, and I'd lose not just the streak, but the access to the version of me that had built the streak. And I kept bumping into a ceiling I couldn't explain. And then it clicked, not like a lightning bolt, but more like a slow recognition that the ceiling wasn't in my strategy. It wasn't in my discipline. The ceiling was in the state that I was operating from. And everything I was trying to build, the habits, the mindset, the systems, the work, it was sitting on an unstable foundation. The foundation was my nervous system. And when I started working at the level of regulation first, everything else started functioning the way it was supposed to. And that realization became Resilient.
Nice. I think people underestimate how important flow state is. I'm not
Yeah.
one of them. And
Yeah.
the people in my circle that I work with closely, they always know it's now a good time, and they're not offended when I tell them no. Like, I'm in my groove
Yeah.
and things are flowing, and I'm not gonna be distracted. I'm not gonna be interrupted. Now, if it's an emergency, maybe, but they know what emergency is. But I was talking to a guy, his name's Stephen Puri, and I think he was in December, and he was a producer, Hollywood producer for like blockbuster movies like Wolverine, Die Hard, Independence Day. And we really talked about this flow state. He says, when you get ramped up, it's like an airplane. You take off and you get wrapped up into your state and you're flowing along. That when you get distracted or you break your state and you come back down, it's like landing the plane, and you got to start
Yeah.
from scratch, and you got to get your speed up again, and then get back up to where you were. He says that takes 20 minutes, and sometimes
Yeah.
me longer if I can get it back. But like when I'm in flow state, I protect that immensely. So you and I must have been reading a lot of the same books because I'm a believer. So
Yeah.
what were you originally looking for when you started that journey?
Yeah. I wanted more edge, right? Like, I was already achieving, but I had this sense that I was leaving something on the table, that the next version of me was closer to his ceiling than I was. And I hadn't identified what was holding that ceiling in place. I thought the answer was discipline. I thought it was mindset or, a better morning routine. I was looking upward at peak performance, asking, what do I need to add? But what I found was the answer was underneath me, not above me. It was in recovery. It was in regulation, in the foundational state from which everything else either works or it doesn't. And that was the miss for me. And also the aha moment. Your performance ceiling will never rise higher than your recovery floor. And that's not a metaphor. That's a functional description of how the nervous system actually works. You see, every biological system oscillates, heartbeat, breath, brainwaves, hormones, and your body is no different. performance is no different. It follows the wave: resilience, recovery, performance, and return. And performance is the crest, and it only exists because the trough is the crest. This is a matter of physics, a matter of biology. So your peak can only rise as high as your recovery floor. Now, when you sort of forego the recovery, then the wave starts to shorten. And when the wave starts to shorten, the system starts to compress. And when the system starts to compress, perception narrows. You lose range. And we experience that perceptual narrowing as a sensation called overwhelm. So what I was focused on was adding layers to the top while the foundation was unstable. I had missed the simple biological law upon which performance is built.
It's you wouldn't have known this, but my son was an elite athlete. He was,
Yeah.
I think he was ranked, his highest rank was 222 in the world in the steeplechase, and I think at one point he was like 31 in the United States when he was a senior in college. He ran for
Yeah.
Wichita State, but and he ended up having a pro running contract for Minnesota Distance Elite for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And he would agree with 100% with what you're saying, that like the recovery, they protected the recovery days. If they didn't let their bodies recover, then they couldn't push it harder. And even when they gave the effort, their body didn't have the capacity to
Right.
go harder. And if they couldn't push that ceiling because they weren't recovered, then they didn't get the types of adaptations that they would have gotten if they had taken the time to rest. And it's like they understood the difference of making a rest day. Every workout had its objective, and the
Right.
objective on rest days was to rest and to recover.
Yeah.
Just like on a speed work day, the objective is to get faster, or if you're going to work on your lactate threshold. I mean, there's different things that each workout had a specific objective, and some days that objective was rest. And if they didn't take that, they're limited what they could do. And I understand the mentality of wanting to push, like, oh, I got to give my effort every day.
Right.
And I get that, but sometimes the effort is on, I'm going to give 100% of my effort to rest and to
Yes.
recovery. So like, I get what you're
Yes.
saying. So
Yeah.
when did you realize that the answer was not more discipline, but regulation?
Yeah, there was a pattern I kept hitting that I couldn't explain through any of the usual lenses. I built a great window. I was sharp. I was executing at a high level. I was in flow. And then something would happen, a stress event, an unexpected disruption, and I'd lose it. Not just the streak, I'd lose access to the version of me that was performing at the level that I really expected of myself. It was like a different operating system had loaded. And I started paying close attention to what was happening in these moments, not just what I was doing differently, but what was happening underneath. And I started seeing the variable that wasn't necessarily my habits or my strategy or my effort. The variable was simply state. It was my nervous system state. And when that shifted under stress, my performance ceiling would drop. My decisions would narrow. My creativity would contract. My access to all the nuanced details that were once easy, it just became difficult. Everything started to feel heavier. My options started to disappear. My patience would thin. And that's when I saw the real problem. I had been treating discipline like the engine, but discipline is a byproduct of a regulated system, not a replacement for it. And once I understood that, everything reorganized. I stopped asking, how do I get more discipline? And started asking, what state am I operating from? And those are completely different questions with completely different answers.
Tony Robbins talks a lot about how important state is, and I
Yeah.
think one of the examples he was using, and I'm totally dating myself because I grew up watching guys like Michael Jordan play basketball, and
Yeah.
Robbins gave an example. I don't know whether it's one of his books or one of his seminars or whatnot, but it's like Michael Jordan goes out and he scores 50 points one night, and
Yep.
the very next night he scores 25. Did he lose half of his ability? Was he
Right.
not disciplined that night? Did he not give effort? No, it had nothing to do with that. He
Right.
was just in a flow state, and the night he scored 50 points, and maybe not so much today he scored 25.
Yeah.
I mean, he talked about Andre Agassi when Andre was at the top of the world, and he talked about when he was ranked in the 130s, and
Yep.
just and
Yep.
what was the difference? And it was and I'm summarizing what Tony Robbins said, but he said it
Sure.
was his state, and Tony taught him how to rekindle that state on
Right.
demand and walk onto the
Right.
court like you shouldn't even shown up to compete against me today. I'm going to destroy you type of
Yeah.
attitude and state versus,
Yeah.
I hope I do okay today. And it's that flow state that I agree 100% with what you're talking about. So why do so many high performers, in your opinion, confuse dysregulation with drive?
Yeah, and I think we're already touching on it naturally with the Tony Robbins reference, because dysregulation can look exactly like drive from the outside, and it can feel like drive from the inside, at least for a while. When your nervous system is dysregulated, you're hyperactivated, you're faster, you're more reactive, you're always moving, and it's always urgent. And in our culture, we reward that. We call it hustle, we call it commitment, we give it a promotion. But what's actually happening is your nervous system is running a threat protocol. It's not moving towards something, it is moving away from something. It is bracing. The clearest distinction I know: drive moves you toward your vision, dysregulation moves you away from threat. And they can look identical from the outside and feel very similar from the inside, but they have completely different origins, completely different neurochemistry, and completely different ceilings.
So I think
Drive,
you're starting to get on what I was getting ready to ask. And I think you're kind of going along that path there. Like,
yeah,
how does overwhelm change the way that leaders think, decide, and relate? You're making total sense to me. I get that.
yeah, absolutely. But you're touching on and a big part of that 12-month odyssey when I came through the other side was to make this more accessible. Because when I came out of my 12-month odyssey, man, I felt like the version of myself that I came here to find. And it was very important to me to take something that felt like mindset, to take something that felt almost mystical, at this incredible becoming I'd been a part of, and articulate the flip side of a lot of those feelings that can feel almost mystical, that can feel like mindset, that can feel like a becoming, and articulate the biology beneath the becoming, articulate the mechanics beneath the mindset, beneath the mystical feeling, because it was important to understand and important for me to articulate that this is mechanical. This is repeatable. This is something that you can consistently have access to. And that was very important in articulating this work, is to understand that this is a product of rhythm and mechanics more so than something that is out of reach. And that's something I very much wanted to share with other folks, is the idea that, this is something that you can really work with in a repeatable, measurable fashion.
See, I think people who are athletes will relate to this immediately, because
Yeah.
anybody who, I don't care whether you play basketball or football or tennis or you've been a runner or whatever, you know what a peak state feels like, and
Yeah,
you know what a
absolutely.
difference that makes on your performance. I mean, you've experienced it. It's not a, gee, I wonder what that's like. You've felt the high highs, you felt the low lows, and you know what the difference
Yeah.
is. I think there are probably people watching and listening that probably think, well, how does that help me in the business world? And I think that, or how does that help me professionally? How does it help me personally? And I think there are, the answer is a lot of ways. I mean,
Yeah.
I can think of, this would have been 1990. I'm totally dating myself. 1991. I hit a rough patch, couple presentations, and I was not in peak state.
Yeah.
And the guy that I was working for was very much into this, and he was a national sales trainer and spectacular. And we literally focused on getting into a peak state. And I remember walking in, and I wasn't faking. I was just tuned into the best version of myself.
That's right.
And I let it rip with absolute commitment and certainty, and it flowed like no one's business. And my state set the state of the room, and literally everybody bought, every
Yeah.
single one of them.
Yeah.
And like, I can remember this from 1991. I can remember the place. I remember the town. I remember the business name. I remember where people were sitting. Like, I'll never forget that. Or you think about it with relationships. If you show up in a peak state with your spouse or your wife or your boyfriend or whatever, and you are in that state, that's going to rub off and affect them in a positive way, and make them better because they're around you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see where this is not just, I think the athletes are going to really easily relate to it. But for those that might be like, well, I don't know, like, try it, man. Like, try it with your family,
Yeah.
try it with work. And like, I'm a full believer in what you're talking about. That's why I was excited to have you on. What are the behaviors that high achievers get praised for that are actually warning signs.
Yeah. And we're already touching on it, right? Like the whole idea of wake up earlier, grind harder, outlast, hustle more. A few that I see constantly: never needing rest. We celebrate the person who works through the weekends, skips vacations, treats sleep like a negotiable line item. But the person who can't regulate down has lost the recovery half of that performance cycle. It's all up here. And we already talked about what happens when you neglect the other side of the wave that is performance. They're not optimized. They're broken in a way that looks like dedication, always being available, constant responsiveness, reads as commitment. But a person who can't create space, who can't be unreachable, is running a continuous background threat scan. Their mind is looping. It comes through sooner than later as distraction because their nervous system never fully downshifts. And that has a cost that compounds slowly and quietly, because high output, specifically under pressure, we applaud this loudly. But if someone only performs well under pressure, what you're watching is a threat state activation, not elite, sustainable functioning. They need the adrenaline to find the gear. Take the pressure away, and what you'll find is it's usually hard for them to work. That's not a strength, that's a dependency. And emotional steadiness, that's actual flatness. And we call it composure. But there's a critical difference between a regulated leader and someone who is genuinely calm, and a dysregulated leader who has gone emotionally offline. One is a resource, the other is a liability in disguise. From the outside, they can be nearly impossible to tell apart. That's why this work matters. So you can access that version of you without the dependency on adrenaline, without the need for that external validation of someone looking and saying, hey, look, they're killing it. They never rest on weekends, because you can't build a sustainable foundation on that. And you can't solve an internal problem with more external effort. And that is something that really has changed the game in how I operate and how my clients operate. And that is something that I work to spread through my message in my workshops, is to understand the nature and the mechanics of how performance truly operates.
So, where does the brain bleed fit into your larger understanding of recovery and listening to the body?
Yeah, the brain bleed was a different kind of teacher. The 12-month odyssey that became resilient was intentional. I was testing and tracking. I was pushing to the edges of my own performance, coming to step in the ring with myself time and time again. And what I discovered was that regulation was the foundation of everything. The brain bleed removed my ability to choose any of that. There was no optimization. There was no override. My body gave me a ceiling I couldn't negotiate with, and it didn't ask for my buy-in. So what it taught me, in a way no framework could really replicate, is that the body is always keeping score. It records every shortcut you've ever taken with your recovery, every stressor you've absorbed but didn't process, every time you pushed through and called it a win. Your body is keeping score. And it also forced a question I wasn't prepared for. When the performance is gone, when the output is gone, who are you? And a lot of high achievers, high performers don't have a clean answer to that question. Who am I without the output? And that's a problem that exists long before a medical event forces it to the surface, forces you to confront this aspect of yourself. So the brain bleed itself deepened what resilient teaches about identity, about recovery, about the long game, about sustainability, to respond to the life that is already calling you, to who you want to be and the things you want to do. It didn't create the work, though. The work came from realizing that the ceiling isn't discipline, it's the floor beneath it.
Gotcha. So, why is regulation a more approachable entry point than, say, waiting for a crisis?
Yeah. And that's such an important question to ask, especially today, because the people who need this work often don't think they need this work. They're still performing, they're still producing, they're still receiving that external validation that tells them the machine is functioning, right? A crisis-based origin story, a collapse, a hospitalization, a breakdown, it's relatable for the person only who's already hit the floor. But it actually creates distance for the person who is still standing close to it. So the more honest doorway for this work is you don't have to hit the floor to recognize the floor is closer than it should be. You can still feel dysregulation without a diagnosis. You can feel the flatness, the chronic edge, the quiet depletion over time. The fact that your best performance requires more effort for the same output. You don't need a dramatic event to name that something feels off. Regulation, well, it's also a less threatening frame than burnout. Nobody wants to admit they're burning out. That's hard. But
Right.
if I ask you whether you're recovered, whether you feel like you have full access to your capacity, whether you're available when I'm speaking to you or simply looping for the next threat, the next meeting, the next mental checklist, most high performers are going to pause. And that pause is the doorway. It doesn't require a crisis to walk through it. You don't have to wait till it gets to that point. We talk about the idea that within the rhythm of performance is an oscillation, right? Well, overwhelm is that shortened oscillation. Burnout is a flat line. It's loss of oscillation. And it doesn't have to get there for you to start doing something about it, for you to feel a little bit better any given day when you wake up. Because the earlier you walk through that doorway, that is the pause that says, I want these things, I see these things, I hear these things, I feel these things. The earlier you walk through that door, the more of you get to access and the more of your ceiling you get to keep before it becomes something that does demand a reckoning, right? Because sooner or later, your body knows, and it's going to demand a reckoning if you don't start listening to it.
So, what do you think ambitious people most often misunderstand about pushing through?
Yeah. Well, like me, they think it's a strategy, and for a season that will work, which is exactly the problem, because early success with a bad strategy convinces you that the strategy is sound, right? Well, this works. But the human nervous system is resilient. It has redundancy built in. You can borrow against your reserves for a long time before the bill arrives. So when you push through and it works, you don't get accurate feedback. You get rewarded, you get reinforced, you get promoted. But what you're not seeing is that it's being drawn down in the background. You're building up this recovery debt, this regulatory capacity, the elasticity of your emotional response, the bandwidth you have for your family, for your relationships, for your deepest thinking. And the fundamental misunderstanding there is that you end up treating your body like a machine. Machines degrade predictably. You can push the red line, and if it doesn't break, you've learned the limit, right? But the nervous system doesn't work that way. The damage accumulates in ways that aren't visible until they're significant. And the most dangerous season is often the one where everything still looks fine. Pushing through sometimes is necessary. I'm not saying don't do it, but it is a withdrawal, not a deposit. And most high achievers, most high performers are treating it like income. And withdrawals without deposits, well, they eventually collapse the account.
So, what is one simple way someone can begin restoring regulation before they hit a wall?
Yeah. The simplest intervention I know is also one that's most underestimated, and that is a full stop, not a break, not switching from one demanding task to the next, not checking your phone during the pause, a full stop. 2 to 3 minutes where the goal is not productivity, not optimization, not self-improvement. The goal is to simply let your nervous system register that there is no threat right now. And most high performers are carrying a continuous activation load. Their system is running in the background like an app that never closes, always scanning, always managing, always on low-level alert, even during rest. It's running. And a full stop is a signal. It says the threat response is not needed in this moment. And what makes it powerful isn't any single pause, it's repetition over time. This starts to rebuild the regulation floor. It lowers the baseline activation. A lower baseline means more range for when you actually need it, for the people who need access to that version of you. So what I start everyone with and what I like to teach is a 90-second regulation reset. I close every keynote with it because I want people to walk out with something that you can use immediately in the car. The goal is always to make the entry point as small as the gap between knowing and not knowing is wide. And I can walk you guys through it right now if you're interested.
Let's hear it.
So I want you to start by softening your eyes. I want you to widen your peripheral vision. I want you to press your thumbnail gently into the pad of your middle finger. This prompts belly breathing instead of chest breathing. Now, lengthen your exhale slightly and feel your feet in your shoes. Place one hand on your solar plex and the other on your lower ribs. And don't change the breathing yet. First, just notice it. Is it high? Is it fast? Is it shallow? Now, inhale through your nose for 4, hold for 2. Now out for 6. Again, in for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. One more time. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. Now, keep your posture tall. That steadiness, that's safety. That clarity, that's your operating system stabilizing. And that availability, that's regulation. And if you notice, nothing in your external life changed in those few seconds. Your responsibilities didn't disappear. Your inbox probably didn't clear itself. The pressure didn't vanish, but the system changed. And once the system changes, your relationship to pressure changes. And that's the doorway.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. If there was only one piece of advice you could give to people who are watching or listening today, what would it be? And why?
Yeah. The thing I hear most from the people who find me is, I don't know how I got here, but I cannot get myself to move. And that's the thing about overwhelm. It quietly narrows everything down until your options feel like zero. That's not a capability problem. That is a regulation problem. And that's exactly what I fix. So I'm launching a group program, 4 weeks, small room, very specific blueprint. And for anyone listening, I'm running a podcast offer right now for you alone, Mason.
No.
The code is unstuck, and I'll give you 75% off. And the first 10 people who sign up using your code word get a full human design reading on top of it. So you can actually understand the blueprint of how you are built, the architecture beneath you, to start making decisions that are immediately something your body says yes to. And if something in you, if you're listening today, just went, yes, that's me, that's not a coincidence. Come find me, 7pillarsystem.com, the number 7pillarsystem.com. Let's go.
I was just going to say, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? Are you active on any of the social channels or LinkedIn?
Yep. Yeah, you can find me across social at Jason Alan Bohrer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this.